Hey folks, I just wanted to do a video on permaculture gardens, and we just put in another garden here. You can see it behind me here. I should just get my face out of the shot so you guys can take a look at it. And we chose this garden because it's on the south side of our house, so it's got a really great microclimate. This is actually what we're going to be calling our kitchen garden because it's nice and close. It's pretty small. And so we have lots of room to expand it out here, but one of the reasons we didn't choose this larger piece of grass was because it's east facing, and so it'll get great morning sun, but then it gets quite a bit of shade in the afternoon. And so we may end up extending this garden kind of a little bit further out here and kind of gaining advantage of that great microclimate. But you'll notice that the garden space kind of that extends out right here doesn't have a house behind it. And so one of the kind of key things that you can do to enhance the microclimate is not only having a south facing garden, but also to have kind of space or a structure behind the actual garden itself, like a house or a shop like this one over here. You'll see that we've done it on this side as well, because that shades or takes away the view of the sky, which really affects the plant growth at night when the sun goes down, because space is really cold and it absorbs a lot of the energy. So in this video that comes after this little intro here, I wanted to share an excerpt just quickly here, actually, before I give you that intro. Just take a peek at this. So this is our squash bed right here, and you'll get a sense of, again, we've got a south facing garage, we've got a white surface, and so that vertical surface is going to keep it much warmer at night because it takes away its view of the sky. So sorry, I kind of started that intro there and then stopped halfway through. In this video, which is 25 minutes long, Carmen and I go through what's called the Permaculture Garden. And we're just getting through our permaculture design course, our online permaculture design course, just about to finish. People are going to start going away and doing their designs now. And we've had such rave reviews about these videos that we wanted to share a few of them with you. And so in this video, Carmen's going to go in detail about the concept of solar energy and microclimates and different aspects, and how they potentially will help you to choose the right space for your garden. She's also going to talk about nutrient cycling, the carbon cycle, and how that plays into the nutrient density of your food, as well as the water resilience, the nutrition, the flavor. All of those things play a really important role. And ultimately, when you kind of combine all of these things together, it's going to dictate how successful you are in creating a garden for yourself. So take a look at the video. If you're interested in learning about the online design course, or being notified when we put another one up, which may not be in the too far into the future here, we're thinking about potentially launching one again in the fall, you'll want to be on our newsletter list. And in the meantime, we're going to release some of these clips out into the wild so that you guys can benefit from them. We've got a ton of video footage, well over 100 hours, and so we will put a few of those clips up onto YouTube. Anyways, if there's something specific that you want to learn about permaculture gardening, put it into the show notes or the comments below, and we'll take a peek at those, and we'll see if we can help you guys out by posting it up to YouTube. Okay guys, have a great day. We'll talk to you real soon.
Yes, siting and orientation of our structures is going to dictate how well we can optimize the use of the solar resources we have available. So, you know, Rob talked a little bit the other day about that. Was it 12 degrees or 15 degrees, Rob, off of south that optimize the use for a passive or for a solar system?
Yeah, between 15 and 30 degrees is kind of optimal. But you can see that even if you're directly east or west, you still get an enormous amount of sun. So
that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
sorry, just do a sound check here. Somebody is okay. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Good.
Perfect.
So you guys have been doing a lot of this. So obviously, in the way that we orient our structures as well as our gardens, you know, will make a difference on how much we can capture the solar resources. So, for example, when it comes to siting greenhouses, there's sort of two schools of thought. One is, you know, let's run it east to west. If we're running a passive solar greenhouse, that's typically the best way to go. We want an east-west orientation so that we can capture as much solar energy as possible on the south side. But it also depends what kind of crops you're going to grow. So if you're a commercial grower, you are more likely to orient your greenhouses going north-south because you're running long rows. So for example, if you're growing tomatoes and that's your big crop, you're going to want to have those crops all receive approximately the same amount of solar resources. So the way you do that is you run your rows north and south. Whereas if you try to grow tomatoes on an east-west orientation, you would have a ton of shading for most of the day on all of your crops. So in our little greenhouse, we have the space to orient east-west, and we typically grow tomatoes on the north side and then peppers on the south side. So for smaller greenhouses, you know, you can play around a little bit with that orientation and maximize your use of solar resources depending on what you're going to be growing. So when we look at nutrient cycling, this is really what this section is going to be all about. We've kind of talked about optimizing that energy cycle as far as solar resources go. But as a permaculture garden, we're always going to be concerned with how we cycle and recycle our nutrient resources so that we can restore our damaged ecosystem. Just one second here. Christian, I can hear all of that, by the way. Thank you. So that we can restore our damaged landscapes, but also once we've got them back to a good balanced nutritional state, that we can enhance productivity and ecological health as we go along. So in natural systems, we've got this constant cycling of resources. In natural systems, there's never any waste. So everything is in perfect balance to be used and reused and broken down and reused. The cycle continues on and on and on. And this is a really, this is like an incredibly important component of building resiliency into your systems, is understanding that this nutrient, we want to mimic the nutrient cycling that occurs in natural systems as much as possible so that we can reduce inputs over time. So when we look in natural systems, as we just spoke about, we are going to see this, we're going to see this unbroken cycle. So we've got this cycle where biomass falls to the ground, and then that biomass is transformed into components, nutritional components that can be used by the plants and drawn up through the roots, and back the cycle continues over and over and over. It's an unbroken cycle, goes on and on and on and on and on. And it evolves as well over time, depending on where we are in succession. We'll talk about that in a bit. When we look at industrial agricultural models, we actually have a broken cycle because everything is leaving. Everything is leaving the property. Nothing is getting reinvested back into that nutritional bank in the system. So it's a completely broken system, which is why it cannot sustain itself. It cannot be resilient. It has no self-repair. And everything is just leaving the property. And Rob spoke to that just a little bit the other day. Basically, when it comes to some of the most important components in building life and the nutritional cycle, carbon and nitrogen are the two big players. So if we look at the carbon cycle, there's this beautiful unbroken cycle that happens all the time without us having to manage it. So we've got atmospheric carbon that's being captured through the photosynthetic process of the tree. And then we've got some of that carbon is being used in the storage of, in the production of of foliage, branches in the trunk. Some of that stuff gets pushed down into the soil and becomes roots and organic matter, and soil life is in there as well. Carbon is internally transferred to become roots. Fallen leaves and branches, when things start to change in the fall, we start to get that carbon returning down to the soil, right? Returning to the soil, being cycled into the soil. And then some of that carbon as a gaseous form is lost back into the atmosphere. So it's this cycle that goes on and on and on. And this is what occurs without any intervention in natural systems. And as an essential building block for life, carbon is in every organism that is alive or has once lived. And that's why we can do carbon testing on only carbon-based organisms, right? Things that have lived once or were once alive. So you can't do carbon testing, let's say, on a rock because it doesn't have a carbon component. So as an essential building block for life, this is like an incredibly important component that we have to be mindful to keep in cycle. So when we run industrial models, it's very, very difficult to keep the carbon cycling properly. So if we look at Earth's carbon pools, you know, there was a time where everything was absolutely in balance. That from gas to solid, with this ongoing cycling. So atmospheric carbon would get fixed into the biosphere, into the soil. Some of those carbon elements would become some of Earth's carbon, like some of the fossilized carbon storage that we've got. And so lots of carbon in the ocean as well. So these carbon pools were always in balance. But the moment that we start extracting deep carbon sources out of these deep fossilized carbon pools, we're now extracting all of that and getting that into the atmosphere. So we've all heard a lot about that. But also our land management practices are constantly releasing carbon into the atmosphere. So whether that's industrial practices, like industrial farming and tillage, or it's basically through deforestation, all of those carbon sources are just getting released into the atmosphere. So losing it from the soil and getting it into the atmosphere. So the increase in excess carbon in the atmosphere is what's trapping solar radiation. So, you know, honestly, strategies here, this is really just a symptom of the fact that we're losing the balance of carbon in our system. So in our area here in Alberta, we've got this beautiful soil called, what depends on the area you're in, but it's usually brown Chernozemic soil, and it's really absolutely beautifully rich. We've got areas around Calgary that have well over 3 feet of topsoil. And it's quite funny, we've done we did a consult for a family that had bought a farm out near Crossfield, which is northwest of where we live. And they had recently moved from BC. And she called me, she said, Carmen, we need you. She'd been to one of my soil classes or something. And she said, Carmen, we need you to come out and, you know, and do a consult for us because, you know, we've heard that the soil in Alberta is just crap. And I said, oh, okay, well, I can come. She said, I just need to know what I can do about that. You know, like, can I grow anything? And so we went out there, and they had 3 feet of topsoil, and it was beautiful, beautiful, beautiful soil. And it was amazing to me because it was classic brown Chernozemic soil. And so this kind of soil really only occurs where the ground is frozen for a period of time and where there's these annual water deficits. And the reason this soil is so rich is because, and the reason why it's rich because it has a ton of carbon in it. And the reason it has a ton of organic matter, and the carbon in the form of organic matter, is that these frozen periods of time and these times when the ground has less water in it, so the times of drought, what those two things actually do is they slow down the activity of the soil microbes. And those soil microbes are always eating organic matter. And so when you've got places that have no freeze thaw or have a lot of water, the chances are is that a lot of nutrients are either leaching out of the soil, it can't hold on to carbon, but also that the microbial populations are less. So and there's another issue that happens in some areas is that where you've got ongoing, like you've got no freeze thaw, is that because those microbes are active for the entire year, they're eating up all the carbon in the soils. Now you end up with carbon deficits in your soil. So we're really, really lucky where we live to have this massive amount of organic matter already in our soil. Excuse me. But it's really largely due to the fact that we have winter and we have periodic droughts. So once you open up soils, either you're leaving the soils open or right after cultivation, you're already losing 15 to 30% of your carbon from your soil. It's just off gases up into the atmosphere. So there's been a big trend towards no-till gardening, no-till agriculture. And the good thing about that is that they're basically seeding directly into the previous year's stubble. And there's two really good things about that. Not the least of which is the fact that by leaving the stubble in the ground, there are roots being left in the ground. And those roots actually, as they decay in the soil, are providing organic matter for our microbes. So we've got good microbial health. Sorry, guys. So if we look at the nitrogen cycle, this is the other big player here, is that we've got this ongoing cycling without any human intervention. So we've got nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil that are capturing atmospheric nitrogen. Some of those are getting transformed into different forms of nitrogen that different kinds of plants like to use. We've also got the organic matter that's breaking down. So dead matter also releases not just carbon, but nitrogen into the soil, and also dead animals. And anytime you've got animals in the system, they're providing the manure. All of this gets transformed by all of these various types of microbes that are active in the soil. So some of them are the decomposers that are breaking down things into little bits and bytes. And then we've got other ones that are turning that nitrogen into ammonium, and other bacteria that are changing the ammonium into nitrites. And after that, a whole different species of bacteria that are changing those nitrites into nitrates. And then we've got other ones that take those substances and basically gasify them again so that that gas as nitrogen can leave and go back into the atmosphere. And the cycle continues. So it's really interesting to me that both in carbon cycling and in nitrogen cycling, it's the microbes in the soil that are the big players here. So if we didn't have carbon and we didn't have nitrogen, we would have no life on this planet. We could not exist. So when we owe that all to these little creatures that we can't even see, which I think is amazing. So it doesn't matter whether we have a nitrogen cycle that's cycling through a natural system, or whether we've got a nitrogen cycle through an agricultural system. It's exactly the same process. So most times, in order to build resilience in a permaculture garden or a farm, animals are a really big part of the nutrient cycling. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into with Dakota's session. All right, so let me just move on to here. So how to, what are some of the strategies that we can employ to keep the nutrients in play, to keep everybody happy, keep that soil quality high? We'd like to reduce or eliminate tillage. So this is for a number of reasons. We want to keep that carbon in the ground. We want to keep as much carbon and nitrogen in the soil, but also every time we till, we're going to be destroying some of the really important fungal entities in our soil. So we've got these little critters, little fungal strands that are 1 cell thick. And these guys play such an, I'm not going to get into the actual details of them because I know Mike's going to want to do that. But every time we till, we break up those fungal strands. We basically are building fertility off the backs of all the dead microbes in our soil. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, you can judiciously use tillage to serve you, because sometimes it can help you knock back your soil to an earlier state of succession by managing the microbial profile. So there are plenty of people in permaculture that do continue to till. They do it very judiciously, timed correctly. It can be a strategy to help you maintain your soil at a certain level. So the way, if we want to eliminate tillage in our own yards, we can use this kind of strategy. So if you've got a subsoil below a smaller profile of topsoil, what you can do is, instead of running a rototiller through that soil and mixing up your clay layer with your topsoil layer, which is going to give you some pretty rough soil, respecting that clay layer below and just opening up channels in it to allow air, microbes, organic matter, and water in, is a really fantastic strategy. And it's really all I do on my property every spring. I use this method. I use this fork, this flat bladed fork like this, and every few inches I just get down into my soil, because in the springtime, over winter, our soil has a tendency to compact a little bit. So opening it up again, especially if you're putting on some amendments, like if you're growing a greens crop and you've got some extra manure and you want to put it in there, or you're top dressing with compost, you can use this fork method and open up your soil. So Rob's probably going to be talking about keyline plows at some point. They are used for the distribution of water on a property, but they can also be used to break up hardpan on properties that have seen years and years and years of tillage. And by tilling at the same level all the time, basically the soil below at that level becomes compacted. So now when it rains on the property, if you've got that compacted soil below, the water's got nowhere to go. So you end up flooding your fields, and you end up with a lot of erosion. So, and you'll also end up with crops like grass crops or wheat crops that normally have incredibly deep rooting systems and go down many, many feet into the soil. But once there's hardpan in place, the farmers can sow these great crops of wheat, but the roots can't penetrate through that hardpan. So this is one strategy, using a keyline plow, and this is the blade for that plow. Over successive years, you can go slightly deeper. And the idea here is to open up that soil so that air, water, organic matter, and microbes can get in there. And also those plant roots are going to be able to work their way down there. So those are some strategies for that. So another strategy is using cover crops to build and maintain soil health and keeping those roots in the ground. So we don't really want to see bare soil. Bare soil typically becomes dead soil. And, you know, in natural systems, we never, ever, ever see bare soil. In a natural system, there's always going to be some kind of, it's either going to be a lot of mulch that falls down from the tree and is covering the soil, or you're going to see some living mulch in the form of the plants that are coming in that are opportunistic, that love that niche. They're going to occupy that niche and protect that soil for you. So in our own permaculture systems, we want to mimic that. So we want to ideally have our soil covered and roots in the ground. So using cover crops is a really, really great strategy for building soil health. And sometimes it's tough to devote real estate, you know, if you've got a small area to grow in. It's really nice if you can leave one bed that's not in active production per se. In our short season, it's sometimes better just to devote that bed to a cover crop that year. So one of the best is an annual rye. That's such a fantastic cover crop for building soil health. It's got these gnarly roots that are just very complex, and they get in there and they break up that soil. And the nice thing about it is that all you have to do is go in and chop them off, not right to the ground, typically a third, 2/3, or even half. Keep them from going to seed, letting that biomass just remain in place on the soil. And the idea here is that you're allowing those roots, you're putting the energy into the roots, you're stopping it from going to seed. It'll continue to build these crazy roots and break up your soil. And then in the wintertime, winter will come, the frost will kill those plants, but those roots will stay in the ground, and those will decompose and become fantastic sources of carbon in your soil. So one of the things about cover crops that you can have fun with is that the longer you leave your crop, your cover crop, to grow, the more, especially with crops like rye and oats, the more gnarly your roots are going to get. And the more gnarly your roots are going to get, you're actually changing the microbial profile. If you grow a cover crop like buckwheat, which was in this picture here, if you grow that kind of crop, it's a really great green manure, so it'll keep your soil covered. It grows incredibly quickly, and it's a finer kind of texture. So after you cut it down, you can actually break it down and just very gently move that stuff into your soil. It's not going to grow the kind of root system that, let's say, a fall rye will or an annual rye will. It will actually break down really quickly, so it's going to be a little more bacterial in its function, building bacterial dominant soil, than it will the more fungal profile. So you can play around with those a little bit and you'll see quite a difference. You can also combine cover crops. You can intercrop. In this picture here, we've got low growing annual clover with some cabbages. So typically we'll use annual crops with annual beds and perennial crops with perennial growing systems. But it's a fantastic way to keep the nutrient cycle going, right? We don't want to leave our soil bare.